The shriek of the card reader sliced through the warm hum of Honey and Hearth Bakery like a fire alarm. Steam curled from cappuccinos, cinnamon and butter swirled in the air, and Nora Hart felt every conversation snag on that one sound. Heads turned as if pulled by invisible strings. The heat of humiliation climbed her neck in a hot flush, crawling up to her ears. She could feel her pulse in her cheeks. "Try it again," the cashier said, a teenager with a silver hoop through her nose and eyes that said she'd seen this before. Her tone teetered on contempt. "Sometimes it's our machine." Nora's fingers trembled as she swiped the card again, willing it to go through, begging the universe for mercy. She'd saved for this cake, pinching pennies all week. The reader beeped. Declined. She swallowed, tasted shame. The soft clatter of plates and low murmur of morning chatter turned into a stage whisper that filled the whole shop. "Maybe you have another one," the cashier said louder now, as if auditioning, making sure the line of 5 behind Nora had front row seats. Someone exhaled dramatically. In Nora's mind, the 5 became 50, then 500. Bodies shifted. The woman in an immaculate power suit leaned toward her friend and said, not quietly at all, "If she didn't have the money, why order a cake?" "People like that always think they'll get away with it," a man in a starched shirt muttered, checking his watch as if time had personally offended him. The cake, a simple chocolate round with modest frosting, sat on the counter in its white box, $24.99, scrawled on a corner label. It was for Grandma Lila's 72nd birthday. Lila, who was waiting at home in their snug South Side apartment, always grateful, never asking for much, deserving at least this one small, sweet joy. Tears burned behind Nora's eyes. She blinked hard, forcing them back. The humiliation burned hotter. It made her want to leave her skin, leave this bakery she'd come to every time something mattered, and never return. "I'm sorry," Nora said to the cashier's blank face, voice barely more than a breath. "Just give me a second. I dash. She's with me." The voice cut through everything like the first cool breeze after a heat wave. Steady, deep, calm. It wasn't an apology. It was a declaration. Nora turned and saw him. He was tall, late 20s maybe, with the kind of symmetrical features that belonged on billboards along Lakeshore Drive. Sharp jawline, eyes the color of warm amber with flecks that caught the light, and dark hair that looked artfully disheveled, like he'd run his hands through it and somehow made a style. He wore a dove-gray cashmere sweater, obviously expensive, but he carried it with a casual confidence that said he'd never checked a price tag in his life. Barely noticeable, but there, an understated watch that probably cost more than her rent. She recognized him. Not his name, she hadn't known that yet, but his face, his presence. He'd been in the bakery 10 minutes earlier, lingering in the gluten-free section like a traveler who couldn't read the signs. He'd been holding 2 loaves of bread, frowning, genuinely lost. She'd hesitated, then moved toward him, pulled by that old instinct she never could ignore. "Looking for something specific?" she had asked. "Yes," he'd said, relief in his voice. "My grandmother, she has restrictions. Gluten-free, dairy-free, now they're talking about cutting sugar. Doctors love to take the joy out of old age, apparently." He'd said it with a dry humor that couldn't hide his affection. Nora had laughed before she could stop herself. "My grandma has restrictions, too. This one," she said, pointing at an almond flour loaf studded with dark chocolate pieces. Gluten-free, sweetened with erythritol, and made with coconut butter. Shockingly edible and actually delicious. "A rare find," he'd said, his amber eyes warming. "Are you a nutritionist?" "A physical therapist," she'd answered, almost shyly. "Was. Geriatrics. I took care of my grandmother for years and learned everything by necessity. And love." "She was lucky to have you," he'd said, and the sincerity landed squarely inside her chest. She'd mumbled a thank you. He'd added, almost to himself, "Seriously, buying things for her makes me feel completely useless." "You're not," she'd replied. "The fact that you're here, trying, that matters more than anything." There had been a flicker then, something behind his eyes that looked like recognition. Like the sudden lift you feel running into a person you haven't met yet but already trust. He'd smiled, unguarded, grateful, and gone to pay. Nora had watched him leave and thought, what a kind man. And then life had tugged her forward, wiping him from her mind. Until now, with his voice anchoring her to the floor as he stepped forward like he owned the very boards beneath their feet. "Sorry, darling," he said with impossible ease, taking Nora's cold hand into his warm one, like it had been his the whole time. "I must have given you the wrong card this morning." They didn't know each other. They were not a couple. He was lying. Every reasonable part of Nora knew that. But then his fingers tightened around hers, gentle but certain, sending a message through skin and bone. "Trust me. I'm on your side." Nora's throat worked. I'm so distracted today," she murmured, playing along, shocked at herself for doing it. "I guess that's what I get for skipping breakfast." "It's all right," he said softly, as if to her and to the audience of strangers. He guided her a step aside, then turned to the cashier. "Hers and mine, please." He slid out a black card. Not just any card, the kind she'd only ever seen in magazines that liked to list the top 10 ridiculous rich person items. The cashier's mouth twitched. The machine purred. "Approved" flashed immediately. The whispers in the line changed flavor. Judgments turned into speculation. Who is he? Look at that card. Is he famous? Does she know him? Bags appeared. So did their exit. He placed a hand at the small of her back, light as a question. The contact sent a fizzing strand of electricity down Nora's spine. Outside, the October air was crisp enough to pinch. The sidewalk crackled with fallen leaves and the distant honk of taxis in Chicago's Gold Coast. He let her go slowly, as if reluctant. "I'm sorry about that in there," he said, his voice gentle, without even a fleck of condescension. "You didn't deserve that." "I'll pay you back," Nora blurted, pride still raw. "Every cent. As soon as I get a job, "Nora," he said. Her head jerked. "How?" "The cashier said your name," he explained, as if names were fragile things to be held carefully. "And about the job." He reached into his pocket and passed her a card made of thick, creamy paper edged in gold. Embossed letters gleamed. "Rowan Kingsley, Chief Executive Officer, Kingsley Capital Group." Beneath was an address on North Michigan Avenue, prime real estate, the kind of address that made her feel like she was looking up at the sky. "You said you worked with seniors." "Specialized," he said. "I do," Nora corrected, a thread of hope cutting through the embarrassment. "I did. But no one hires without 5 years of institutional experience now, and it doesn't matter how much you know if you learned it in the trenches, at home." "I do," Rowan said simply. He flipped the card and scribbled a different address on the back in clean, precise handwriting. "My grandmother needs care. And in 6 months, you're the first person who seemed to understand not just what she needs technically, but as a person. Come tomorrow, 10 in the morning. It's a residence." He glanced up, half apologetic, half amused. "Not nearly as pretentious as it looks, though the gates might argue with me." She looked at the card, then at him, then at the cake balanced in her hands. The cake he'd paid for, the merciless humiliation he'd erased. A job offer that felt like someone opening a door she'd been knocking on for months. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, barely a whisper. "For a stranger?" Rowan considered the question as if it deserved ceremony. "Because sometimes strangers recognize each other better than anyone," he said, quiet and sure. "And because my grandmother is lonely. Too lonely. I don't want to keep watching someone I love feel invisible. You helped a stranger in there today when you didn't have to. Let me return the favor." Before Nora could figure out how to respond, he gave a small nod, as if to seal an agreement with the universe, and walked toward a black Mercedes idling at the corner. He moved with the easy grace of someone who'd never had to prove a thing, and yet woke every day wanting to. He waved once, got in, and was gone. Nora stayed on the sidewalk, her breath fogging in the cool air, a birthday cake in one hand and a business card like a lifeline in the other. Her heart pounded in steady drumbeats that made no sense at all. That night, when Grandma Lila blew out a single candle in their kitchen that always smelled faintly of coffee and lemon cleaner, Nora watched the 2 women she loved most in the world. Dana, her mother, crinkled her eyes when she smiled. Lila pretended to scold Nora for wasting good wishes on cake, then winked. And Nora thought, tomorrow, maybe, just maybe, everything changes. The wrought iron gates glinted like teeth, and Nora was sure they cost more than her entire apartment building. They guarded a mansion that should have been trapped inside a period drama, not perched on Lakeshore Drive. Stone walls, sprawling and dignified, rose toward mature elms. The place radiated generational wealth that had nothing to prove and proved it anyway. Nora checked the address on the back of the card for the third time and then, just to be certain, checked her phone twice. This was ridiculous. This couldn't be right. The estate stretched in green and gray and glass. Beyond the main house, gardens unfurled toward the lake, sculptures tucked into hedges, and a trio of fountains flung arcs of water that would have been at home at Versailles. A disembodied voice crackled from an intercom post near the gate. "May I help you?" Nora cleared her throat. I have a meeting with Rowan Kingsley." It came out like a question. A part of her still believed yesterday had been an elaborate, stress-induced hallucination. "Name, please." Nora Hart. A pause. "Yes, Mr. Kingsley is expecting you. Please come in." The gates swung open with slow theatrics, revealing a circular drive that embraced a courtyard bursting with autumn blooms. It felt like the gates of a theater before the curtain rose. Nora gripped her handbag, took a deep breath that tasted like the lake, and walked forward. What have I gotten myself into? She refused to call a car. The ride to this neighborhood had already taken the last of her cash, and she needed to be practical. She tried not to gawk. It was impossible. A vintage Bentley sat beside a sleek Rolls-Royce, both polished to mirror shine. At the top of the steps, the door opened before she could reach for the gorgeous brass knocker. It wasn't a butler. It was Rowan. Barefoot, wearing worn jeans and a charcoal Henley that fit like a second skin. His hair was a little mussed, like he'd just run his hands through it in a meeting. He was smiling with the relief of someone who'd been holding their breath and could finally exhale. "You came," he said. "I kind of had to," Nora admitted, clutching her bag. "The job. I really, really need a job." "Right," he said, as if the reminder was for himself, too. "Of course. Come in." He stepped aside, and Nora entered a foyer with ceilings so high she felt like she might float away. Crystal chandeliers cascaded like waterfalls. A photograph-lined wall led to a sweeping double staircase that looked stolen from a fairy tale set. The scent of beeswax and roses lingered. Nora tried not to look like a kid in a museum with no guardrails. "It's too big," Rowan said suddenly. Nora turned. "What?" "The house. It's ridiculous," he said, half laughing, half apologizing to an invisible jury. "My parents built it to—" he gestured up at the chandelier. "Prove something, probably. But it's just me and my grandmother, Eleanor, now. We use maybe 8 of the 40 rooms." "40?" Nora echoed faintly. He gave a real, unpolished laugh. "Come on, time to meet the reason you're here." Eleanor Kingsley was nowhere near what Nora expected. She sat in a library that made Nora's inner bookworm want to weep. 2 stories, floor-to-ceiling shelves with ladders on rails that Nora had only seen in movies. Sunlight poured in through leaded windows and glazed the spines in gold. Eleanor wore simple cream cashmere, pearls without fuss, and the kind of posture that said she had met a century head-on and won. A copy of Pride and Prejudice rested open in her lap, a velvet ribbon marking her place. "Grandma," Rowan said gently, as if the word itself was precious. "This is Nora Hart. She's here for the interview." Eleanor lowered her book and studied Nora. Her eyes were the same amber as Rowan's, softened by years and sharpened by a lifetime of paying very close attention. She tilted her head. "You're tiny," Eleanor finally announced. Nora blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Tiny, frail. Rowan says you're a physical therapist, but you look like a strong wind would carry you to Milwaukee." "Grandma?" Rowan groaned, flushing. "I'm strong," Nora said before she could flinch. Her chin rose a notch. "Stronger than I look. I took care of my grandmother for years, helped her through a stroke. I learned every exercise, every technique, and she's thriving today thanks to God and a lot of stubborn work." She smiled. "She says I'm stubborn as a mule. I choose to hear that as a compliment." "Lila," Nora said. "Lila Hart. She's 72. And the wittiest woman you'll ever meet." She can turn a grocery line into a comedy act. I'd like to meet her, Eleanor said immediately, sincerity warming her voice. Women named Lila are always special. My best friend growing up was named Iris, Eleanor added, and a shadow of memory crossed her face. We shared everything. She passed 10 years ago. I still look for her in crowds. For a breath, silence fell, respectful and full. Then Eleanor's expression brightened. You're hired. Grandma, Rowan began. We can't just— I can, Eleanor said, and the queen in her voice made an appearance. And I did. She turned to Nora with a conspiratorial smile. Now, my dear, do you play chess? 3 hours later, Nora had learned 2 things. 1. Eleanor Kingsley was sharper than most people half her age and twice as compassionate. She lost to Eleanor in a blaze of pawns and rooks. 2. The stories Eleanor told about being a Red Cross volunteer during the war and falling for a pilot named Harold were cinematic and achingly real. They had created this mansion together, and yet both preferred the little cottage on a lake they'd once called home. Harold hated this house, Eleanor confided, flipping a rook like a coin. Said it was a museum you couldn't touch. He adored me enough to live in it anyway. So, Rowan said later, when he walked Nora to the hallway, his voice low like the house might listen. Do you accept? $75,000 a year. Room and board during the week, full benefits. It was more money than Nora had ever allowed herself to promise. It would solve problems she was used to keeping hidden. It was also absurdly generous. It made her suspicious enough to blurt, "Why me? You could hire anyone with decades of experience." Grandma hates them, Rowan said without flinching. On paper, they're perfect. In person, they make her feel like a task, like a liability. In 6 months, I've had 15 nurses. She fired 13 and scared off 2 with chess. You walked in, and in 3 hours, she's laughing and telling stories I haven't heard in months. He stepped closer, as if proximity could convey what words couldn't. I don't need perfection on paper. I need someone who sees my grandmother as human. You do that without trying. Nora studied him. The sincerity in his eyes was almost a tangible thing. It had a weight she recognized. The fierce love he had for Eleanor was the kind that could move mountains, or at least rearrange lives. Yes, she whispered, the words slipping out of her like a secret. I accept. The relief that broke over Rowan's face could have lit the chandeliers. Thank you. You have no idea what this means. He insisted his driver take her home. She turned back once to see him at the front door, hands in his pockets, the kind of smile that invited you to share it. I think I just changed my entire life, Nora thought in the back seat. The thought came with equal parts exhilaration and fear. By the time she told Dana and Lila, she could almost say the number without choking. $75,000 a year? Dana's hand flew to her chest. Nora, that changes everything. Is he handsome? Lila asked immediately. Tell me he's handsome. Because if I'm going to live vicariously, I have standards. Grandma, Nora groaned, blushing. A legitimate question, Lila said primly. You'll be living with him. With his grandmother, Nora corrected. I live in the same house as his grandmother. I'll be caring for her, not for him. Lila said, the corner of her mouth turning up. Interesting. That night, Nora lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of her small room, counting the hairline cracks like constellations. She tried not to think of amber eyes and smiles that transform faces into something warmer. She tried to call the quickening in her chest excitement about a job. If she dreamed of someone reading poetry after midnight and making terrible jokes in gluten-free aisles, well, dreams were free. Her first dinner at the Kingsley mansion felt like stepping onto a movie set, where someone forgot to yell cut. The dining room could have hosted a town meeting. There were only 3 place settings. Nora sat in a chair that probably cost more than her whole living room. The food was prepared by a private chef who introduced himself as Matteo and told her to please call him if the salmon needed more lemon. A private chef. She clung to her fork as if it were a lifeline. You're very quiet, Eleanor observed with surgical precision, taking a bite of salmon. Thinking of running away yet? Nora nearly choked on her wine. Just a little, Rowan had said in a conspiratorial whisper as he poured. To calm the nerves. No, Nora managed, definitely not. It's just, this is all very… She searched for a word that didn't insult everything. Excessive. Unnecessary? Ridiculously ostentatious, Rowan offered with a half-smile that told her he agreed. I was going to say different, Nora said, smoothing her napkin. But yes. Maybe a little large for 3 people. Finally, Eleanor clapped her hands once, delighted. Someone who speaks the truth. Grandma, Rowan groaned. I've been telling you for years, Eleanor continued, undeterred. Sell the mausoleum. Buy a home. It would be liberating, Rowan said. But he's sentimental, Eleanor finished, pinning him with a look. He grew up here. Has memories. Even if most of them are of being lonely. Rowan flinched. It was a small movement, a shudder of expression, but Nora, who had learned to read Lila's micro-expressions like road signs, caught it. He covered it a second later with polite blandness. Habit, she thought. A practiced mask. Grandma Lila called me today, Nora said quickly, changing the subject. She wants to know if you'd like to chat sometime. She says women of 72 and 82 have a lot to say about how the world used to make a little more sense. Eleanor laughed and the room warmed. Your grandmother sounds wonderful. She is, Nora said proudly. She's retired and, in her words, bored senseless because my granddaughter ran off to live in a fancy mansion. You told your family? Rowan asked, gratitude flickering in his eyes. Of course, Nora said. My mom almost fainted when I told her the salary. And my grandmother wants to know if you have any handsome single friends. Heat crept up Nora's throat. She's unfiltered. I like her already, Eleanor declared. Bring them. Both of them. This house needs more life, more laughter, more warmth. More warmth, Rowan repeated softly, glancing at Nora in a way that made her stomach flip. The rest of dinner flowed like a story told by someone who loved telling it. Eleanor had opinions on the decade the house was built, new money cosplaying old money in the 60s. Utterly ridiculous, she sniffed. She talked about Harold, about raising Rowan. The most serious little boy you ever met, always worrying, always taking care of me when he should have been out scraping his knees. After dinner, Nora helped Eleanor down the hallway. Rowan was waiting outside the bedroom door. She loves you already, he said when Nora stepped out, easing the door closed so gently it barely clicked. She barely knows me, Nora said, smiling despite herself. Grandma's an excellent judge of character. Always has been, Rowan said. And she sees in you what I saw. He stopped as if a boulder had appeared in his path. Competence, he finished. Professionalism. The way he dropped his gaze, the pale pink on the tips of his ears, told Nora that wasn't what he'd intended to say. Not entirely. Rowan, Nora said before courage could desert her. Can I ask you something? Of course. Are you okay? When your grandmother mentioned loneliness, you went very still. He stood with it for a second that stretched long enough to test patience. Nora thought she'd gone too far. Then he spoke, his voice lower, rougher. My parents are on a cruise again, he said. A strange little laugh caught in his throat. 3rd year in a row. They call every couple of months, maybe. Ask about the business, never about me, never about Grandma. He swallowed. I grew up in this enormous house with only her. The best years were when she was strong, active, teaching me things, the music she loved, the recipes Harold adored. How to change a tire even if everyone told her there were people paid to do that. Now, taking care of her, watching her grow more fragile, it terrifies me. Tears filled his eyes. Nora didn't think. She reached out and took his hand. His fingers curled around hers like they'd been waiting. She's not fading, Nora said. Eleanor is one of the most alive people I've ever met. Yes, she's getting older. That doesn't mean she's lost. It means she needs someone who understands every day is precious. That's you. That's why you hired me. Thank you, he whispered, looking down at their hands before meeting her eyes. For understanding. For being here. For a suspended beat, space folded in around them. They were too close to be anything but honest. It was bigger than jobs or roles. It felt like remembering something and learning it at the same time. Rowan cleared his throat and stepped back an inch. "You must be tired," he said. "Your room is on the second floor, third door on the right. It has a ridiculous tub. If you need anything—" "I'll be fine," Nora said, though her heart was punching her ribs like it wanted out. "Good night, Rowan." "Good night, Nora." Later, Nora lay in a room larger than her entire living room back home, baffled by a king-sized bed and a bathroom with a soaking tub the size of a kiddie pool. She couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling. Every thought took the shape of him. The way his voice broke when he said terrified, the careful way he touched her hand like it was something delicate he didn't want to damage. "No," she told herself, firm like she was scolding a child. "You are here to work, to care for Eleanor, not to develop crushes on billionaires with amber eyes." When she woke, a note was tucked under her door in careful, confident script. "Breakfast at 8. Grandma wants pancakes. Do you know how to make them? If not, we can learn together. Rowan." She held the note as if it might dissolve, and she smiled in a way that had less to do with employment and more to do with wanting to keep that ink. It was nearly midnight when Nora padded downstairs for a glass of water and saw a sliver of honey-colored light bleeding from beneath the library doors. Curiosity tapped her shoulder. She pushed gently and peeked in. Rowan sat curled in a worn leather armchair that looked like it had chosen him. He was barefoot in sweatpants and a t-shirt, a thick book open in his lap. The scene made him look shockingly human. Not the CEO in $1,000 suits she'd glimpsed on Google when she'd done her due diligence. Not the man with the black card. Just a man who looked tired and found solace in words. "Are you going to stand there spying?" he said without looking up. "Or are you coming in?" She jumped. Sorry," Nora said, pushing the door open. "I didn't mean to interrupt." "You're not," he said, finally lifting his head. The exhaustion etched around his eyes wasn't physical. It was the kind that sits heavy on the soul. "I was just hiding. Long meetings, filled with people telling me what they think I want to hear instead of what I need to hear." He closed the book. The title flashed. "The Picture of Dorian Gray." "You read Oscar Wilde at 11 at night?" Nora asked, her curiosity pulling her forward. "When I need to remember that youth and beauty are temporary," he said, a small, self-conscious smile tugging at his mouth. "But art and kindness outlast the mess." He shrugged. "Profound for a Tuesday night, or desperate, take your pick." Silence settled, the comfortable kind that doesn't demand to be filled. Nora crossed the room and sank into the armchair opposite him. "May I?" "The library is for everyone," Rowan said. "Grandma insists. Says books that aren't read are just sad, expensive decorations." "Your grandmother is a wise woman," Nora said. She let her eyes trace the shelves. There were thousands of books, first editions with fragile spines, fat novels held together with tape, biographies, poetry, dog-eared paperbacks. "This is an actual library. 4 generations of Kingsleys accumulating," Rowan said, standing to walk to a particular shelf with muscle memory. "We have everything. Austen to Morrison, Baldwin to Rilke, letters and essays, memoir, a lot of history, some rare things from a great-grandfather who traded stocks and first editions with equal obsession." "Have you read them all?" Nora asked, half teasing. "Maybe a quarter," he said. "I'm working on it." Very slowly, he traced a spine with his fingertips. "Favorites? Depends on the mood," he said, eyes drifting. "When I'm happy, Austen. When I'm sad, Wilde or Bronte. When I'm angry, Nietzsche." "And when you're lonely?" Nora asked softly. He froze, hand resting on the spine of a book as if it had grabbed him. He didn't turn around when he said, "Letters. Old correspondences between writers. Reminds me loneliness is universal. Even geniuses felt it. There's comfort in that. And a warning." The admission pressed against Nora's chest. He turned, as if the room needed to shift to hold what he was about to ask. "What's your favorite?" he said. "Book, absolute favorite." "Persuasion by Jane Austen," Nora said without hesitation. "The Second Chance." He smiled. "The Second Chance. About people who lost each other and found their way back," Nora continued. "About a love that waits without being foolish." "You're an optimist," he observed, but it sounded like a compliment. Or a realist in better clothes. Sometimes the best things are the ones you almost let get away, she said, and the air between them pulsed. Rowan pulled a beautifully bound copy of Persuasion from the shelf. Nora's breath stuttered. I can't, she said, recoiling a little. That looks like a first edition. Books are meant to be read, not entombed, he said, quoting Eleanor almost word for word. Maybe when you're done, you'll tell me why it always wins for you. Why? She asked, fingers hovering above antiqued leather. Because I want to understand, he said. His eyes didn't flinch. I want to understand you. Her hands trembled slightly as she took the book. Okay, but only if you lend me your favorite too. He hesitated. The moment stretched like a held breath. Then he reached for a slim volume. Letters to a Young Poet. Rilke, not a novel, just a way of making sense of solitude. I'll treat it like treasure, Nora promised. I know, he said, as if he'd known that the first time she smiled at him in a bakery aisle. They stood there for a moment, each holding a piece of the other wrapped in paper and cloth. It was intimate in a way a kiss couldn't be yet. Back in her room, Nora opened Rilke and saw a message on the first page in slanted blue ink. To Rowan, on your 16th. When you feel lost, remember solitude is where art is born. But you don't have to live there forever. With love, Grandma Eleanor. Tears stung. This book was precious, a conduit. He had handed her access to a part of himself he didn't speak about. Nora fell asleep with Rilke on her chest, dreaming about libraries and men who read about loneliness at midnight because they weren't sure how to ask for company. In the morning, another folded note waited at her door. Thank you for last night. The conversation was more therapeutic than 6 months of board meetings. Rowan. Nora tucked it with the first one. She was collecting small, bright things to carry on the harder days. The storm arrived without warning, as Midwestern storms do, violent and immediate. Lightning flashed like a strobe. Thunder rattled the windows like a giant knuckle knocking on the glass. Nora, in her room with Rilke open beside her, startled so hard she felt it in her teeth. She had always hated storms. She tried to read, but the words unspooled into nonsense as thunder boomed again and the sky lit up white. The lights blinked once, twice, then died. Pitch black swallowed the room. Okay, she whispered to herself. Okay. Her breath came fast. The room felt enormous and empty when the lights were out, as if it had swallowed her whole. A knock sounded on her door. Nora, Rowan's voice. Are you okay? She opened the door to his face, illuminated by a flashlight beam, hair damp, sweater thrown over a t-shirt. He looked as if he'd run through rain to get here. I'm fine, she lied, too fast, the word thin as paper. It happens sometimes, he said. The generators take a minute. He hesitated. I thought you might not want to be alone in the dark. Something unwound in Nora's chest. Is your grandmother sleeping like a stone, he said. Storms lull her. He tilted the flashlight toward Nora as if to study her in softer light. You don't like storms. It's not a fear, she said, too quickly. More like a strong preference against them. Right, he said, a smile barely there. A strong preference. Come on, I know a better place to wait. There's a sitting room with a fireplace. He guided her through dark hallways with his hand at the small of her back again. Gentle pressure that said he knew where he was going and trusted she would too. The smaller sitting room glowed with a fire already crackling. Rain slashed the windows, turning the garden into a black and silver watercolor. I was in here when it started, he explained. Lit the fire because I knew the power would go. It always does when the thunder sounds like it's sitting in your lap. He gestured to a tray on the low table. Hot chocolate. You know how to make hot chocolate? Nora said. Grateful laughter slipping out on a breath. Grandma taught me, he said, the smile reaching his eyes this time. It's one of the 5 things I can cook decently. Eggs, pancakes, stop laughing, grilled cheese, soup from a can doesn't count, and hot chocolate. They sat on opposite sofas, mugs warm in their hands, the fire snapping. Nora expected awkwardness. There wasn't any. The kind of comfort that arises when 2 people have stopped pretending settled in. Want to know something embarrassing? Rowan said, his voice a little above the hush of the storm. I don't like storms either, for completely irrational, childish reasons. Really? Nora lifted an eyebrow. The billionaire CEO is afraid of thunder? When I was 8, a storm like this hit, he said. My parents were somewhere sunny. It was me here and a nanny who barely spoke English and didn't understand why I was terrified. Lightning hit a tree in the front garden. It went up like a match. For an hour, I thought the house would burn and I would die, alone. Rowan, Nora whispered, the name landing soft and true between them. I know, he said quickly, it's ridiculous. But ever since, he waved a hand, searching. Storms remind me of being alone when it mattered most. It's not ridiculous, Nora said, firmer. You were a child. Children shouldn't be alone during scary things. You're right, he said. But I was. A lot. Silence hushed around them. Nora stood and crossed to his sofa. She sat beside him, not quite touching, close enough to share warmth. You're not alone now, she said. He looked at her. Really looked, in the way that asks and answers at once. No, he said softly, I'm not. Thunder boomed again. They both jumped, then laughed at their synchronized startle. Their shoulders met in a brief brush. That small contact felt like stepping into a warm room after being in the cold too long. Thank you, he said quietly, for being here, for not making me feel like a fool. Thank you, Nora said, for finding me in the dark. They stayed like that, talking about nothing and everything. Childhood nicknames and the first song that made him cry. The way Nora still remembered the exact day Lila's laugh returned after her stroke. The secrets they told were small but true. The storm raged and eventually tired. At some late hour the generator thumped on. Lights flickered to life and the spell loosened. Rowan cleared his throat. You should sleep, he said. Eleanor wakes before sunrise. She believes in beating the day to the punch. Right, Nora said, standing. Thank you for everything. Always, he said, and in that single word was something like a promise that made her heart race for a reason that had nothing to do with running from thunder. She was almost at the door when he called. Nora? She turned. You make storms less scary. She smiled, a small, honest curve of her mouth. You do too. Back in her room, a cozy knitted blanket lay at the foot of her bed. It hadn't been there before. A note was pinned to it. For the next storm, or any cold night, whenever you need comfort. Nora wrapped herself in it. It smelled faintly of cedar and something warmer. She held the note and admitted to herself in a clear thought that made her breath catch. I'm falling. For a man who quotes Wilde at midnight and makes hot chocolate during storms. And she didn't know how to stop. She wasn't sure she wanted to. Rowan hasn't talked about his feelings since he was 14, Eleanor said the next morning, as if noting it might rain. Nora froze mid-stretch, supporting Eleanor's arm carefully. What happened when he was 14? Nora asked, cautious. Eleanor looked out the window. Below, Rowan paced the garden on the phone, his shoulders tight. He asked his parents to come home from their cruise. He was having nightmares, trouble in school. Clearly depressed. Eleanor's voice trembled, just a little, then steadied. Do you know what they told him? That he was being dramatic, that he needed to grow up. They came back 4 months later for a gala. He never asked for anything again. The story sat heavy in Nora's chest all day. She watched Rowan differently, seeing the armor and the seams. At lunch, between jokes about Mateo's insistence on herbs Nora couldn't pronounce, Rowan mentioned an upcoming trip. 2 days in Boston, he said casually, meetings with investors. I leave tomorrow morning. His eyes flicked to Eleanor. Will you be okay without me? I have the best caregiver in the world, Eleanor said, warmth like sunlight. I'll be perfectly fine. Besides, she added, Nora and I are planning an Audrey Hepburn marathon. Breakfast at Tiffany's, Sabrina, perhaps Roman holiday if we're feeling decadent. You'd be bored. Probably, Rowan said, smiling. There was something else in his eyes, though, reluctance or longing. After lunch, Nora found him in his office, sliding his laptop into a sleek bag. Can I talk to you? Always, he said, turning to face her fully. Your grandmother told me about when you were 14. He went very still, like a deer in a stand of trees. She shouldn't have, he said. She worries about you, Nora said gently. And I only wanted to say, If you ever need to talk about anything, I will listen. No judgments. No grow up. No telling you you're dramatic." A vulnerable expression flickered across his face, bare for a heartbeat. "Thank you," he said quietly. "But I'm good at handling things on my own." "No one should have to handle everything alone," Nora said. "Even when we've learned how." That night, Nora woke to a sound that didn't belong to storm or wind. It was softer, rawer, crying. She slipped from bed, pulled on a robe, and followed the sound like a candle flame in the dark. It led to Rowan's door, slightly ajar. She could hear it clearly now. Muffled sobs, the kind a person tries to swallow. Her first instinct was to knock, to go in, to be the kind of comfort Lila had taught her to be. But Eleanor's words tugged at her sleeve. "He doesn't talk about his feelings. If you go in, you expose him. You take away his privacy. You force vulnerability he didn't choose." So Nora stood on the other side of the door. She raised her hand and didn't knock. She stayed, a silent witness, her presence sending a message. "I'm here. You are not alone. I'll be out here as long as you need, even if you don't open the door." After what felt like hours, the crying quieted. She heard movement, the shuffle of composure being put back on like a suit. She backed away quickly, returned to her room before he could open the door and see her. She didn't sleep. She lay awake and stared at the ceiling, her heart breaking in a new way for a boy who had been told that asking for help made him weak, and a man who still believed it. In the morning, Rowan was immaculate. Gray suit, hair combed into something businesslike, expression carved smooth. He greeted them at breakfast like it was any other day. "Good morning," he said. "Sleep well?" "Perfectly," Eleanor said. Nora hesitated, then asked, "Did you?" His eyes met hers. For a fraction of a second, recognition sparked. "Thank you," said something unspoken. He nodded, slow. "Better now," he said. "Much better now." When he left for Boston, Eleanor took Nora's hand. "You were outside his door," she said. "It wasn't a question." "I heard a noise," Nora began. "And you stayed," Eleanor finished. "You didn't invade. You didn't force. You just stayed. Thank you for giving him something he's never had." "What's that?" Nora asked. "A witness," Eleanor said softly. "Someone who cares enough to stay and respects him enough not to push." Tears burned Nora's eyes. "I do care," she said, barely above a whisper. "More than I should." "I know," Eleanor said, smiling. "And soon he'll know it too." The fever caught her by the throat at dawn. 1 minute Nora was fine, the next she was shivering so violently her teeth rattled while sweat slicked her neck. Her throat burned, her skull throbbed. She tried to stand, to go to Eleanor's room for morning exercises, but the floor tilted. She made it to the bathroom by instinct, sick and dizzy. "Not now," she thought, panic rising. "Not when Eleanor needs me. Not when Rowan's gone." She crawled back to bed and reached for her phone with trembling fingers. Who to call? Dana was at work. Lila would panic and show up with half the neighborhood. Rowan? He was in meetings that sounded like they were spoken in metaphor and percentages. A knock came at her door. "Nora?" Eleanor's voice threaded with concern. "It's 7:15. You're never late." Nora tried to answer, but only a moan came out. The door opened. Eleanor took one look at Nora and transformed from cared for to commander. Her hand, cool and sure, pressed to Nora's forehead. "You're burning up," Eleanor said, voice firm. "How long have you been like this?" "Woke up. Like this," Nora managed through chattering teeth. "Don't move," Eleanor ordered with gentle ferocity. She left and Nora heard her on the phone in the hallway, heard urgency in her tone that could make corporations bend. 15 minutes later, the longest 15 minutes of Nora's life, the front door opened and shoes hit the floor in a hurry. Rowan's silhouette appeared in her doorway. He was still in a suit. His tie was askew, his hair was messy as if he'd run a hand through it 1,000 times since landing. He looked like the embodiment of worry. "You were in Boston," Nora said, surprised, and illogical things tangled in her voice. "I came back," he said simply. He crossed to her bed and lay a hand on her forehead, the touch gentle enough to make her want to cry. "You're boiling," he murmured. "Grandma called." I canceled the meetings. You didn't have to, Nora started. I had to, he said, leaving no room for argument and no oxygen for debate. He looked over his shoulder at Eleanor, who stood watching like a field general. You'll be okay on your own for a few hours? I'm 82, not 182, Eleanor said with a small smile. I can manage. You take care of her as she takes care of me. She left, shutting the door softly behind her. What followed blurred into a dream. Nora drifted in and out, fighting the fever, and in every version of waking, Rowan was there. He lifted a cup of water to her lips, coaxed her to sip. He pressed cool claws to her forehead with the care of someone tending to something sacred. When she was sick again, he held her hair back like it was a given. He spoke in a tone she hadn't heard in anyone but Dana, Lila, and, recently, him. You should be working, Nora mumbled once. I am, he said, adjusting her pillows. I'm taking care of the person who takes care of the person I love most in this world. That's work worth everything. I'll get you sick, she whispered. I don't care, he said. Shh, rest. I'm here. He called his private physician. The doctor came, gentle and brisk, diagnosed a vicious flu and scribbled prescriptions. Rowan moved an armchair close enough that his knee bumped the bed. He opened his laptop to keep his hands busy and looked up every few minutes, as if he were a lighthouse and she a ship. At some point, the fever broke like a wave that had carried her too far out. Nora woke lucid, weak, but on solid ground. Rowan had changed into sweatpants and a t-shirt. He slept in the chair, neck at a terrible angle, jaw slack, hair unruly. Shadows bruised his eyes. He looked exhausted and somehow even more beautiful. She didn't want to wake him. She tried to shift and a small sound escaped. His eyes opened immediately, alert like he'd been programmed that way. Are you okay? Do you need anything? His voice was rough with sleep. The bathroom, Nora admitted, blushing. And you need a real bed. Your neck. I'm staying, he said, the words landing with a finality that brooked no argument. Until you're completely better. Why? She asked. That old question, that haunted bakery question rising to the surface. Why do you care so much? He watched her for a long heartbeat, as if choosing a door he would not be able to close again. Because, he said finally, when you're here, this house is a home. And when I thought of you being sick, alone, no one to take care of you, I couldn't breathe. So I came back. And I'll stay as many nights as it takes. Rowan, Nora whispered, but he shook his head. Not now, he said, offering his hand, voice steady with tenderness. Bathroom first, then more water, then sleep. Tomorrow, when you're stronger, we'll talk. He helped her stand, his arm around her waist in a way that made her feel not weak, but cherished. A line had been crossed. She knew it, and she did not want to go back. 2 days later, the house felt normal again. Nora resumed Eleanor's morning routine, slow stretches, careful steps, counting to 8 and back. That evening, Rowan walked in from the office with his wrist bandaged clumsily. What happened? Nora asked, instincts kicking in. She took his hand gently, started to unwrap the makeshift binding. It's nothing, he said too fast, trying to pull away. Rowan, she said, using a no-nonsense tone that sounded suspiciously like Eleanor's. He sighed and stared at the ceiling like it might offer an excuse. Argument with a partner, he said. He suggested we sell off a division that keeps 500 people employed because it wasn't profitable enough this quarter. He lifted his free shoulder. I hit the desk. Hard. Might have sprained it. You might have, Nora said dryly, revealing swelling and angry purple bruising. This needs ice and a proper compression bandage, and you need to not use it for a few days. I have meetings, he protested. You do, she said, which you can conduct with your left hand, or delegate. You do know how to do that, right? She got the first aid kit. When she came back with an ice pack and gauze, he watched her move with eyes that saw more than her hands. You're good at this, he said softly. It's literally my job, she said, wrapping carefully, assessing his range of motion. This is going to be sore. No more punching desks, Mr. Kingsley. He made me angry, Rowan muttered, as if people are just numbers. As if lives are cells in a spreadsheet. I couldn't. You didn't sell, Nora said, looking up. Obviously, he said, then winced as if the movement hurt. But the fight was not my most elegant. You care too much, Nora said, finishing the wrap, letting her fingers linger 1 second longer than necessary. About people, about doing the right thing. That isn't a flaw, it's rare. He was quiet. The air around them shifted, thickening with things they had not said out loud. Nora was still holding his hand. His eyes were filled with an emotion that made breathing effortful. You took care of me when I was sick, he said, voice low, for days. You took care of me first, she reminded him. You canceled meetings. I couldn't stay away, he admitted, running his good hand through his hair like he could untangle his thoughts physically. The thought of you needing something and me not being there made me physically sick. And I know this complicates everything, that you work here, that it's maybe inappropriate, definitely messy and— Rowan, Nora said. She reached up and placed her finger against his mouth. The world stilled. Stop thinking for a minute. Just feel. She took his good hand and placed it over her heart. It thundered against his palm. Do you think it's only you? His eyes widened, like a door had blown open in a storm and shown him everything inside. I took care of you because I wanted to, she said, because the idea of you being hurt, even by a desk, made me want to move mountains, like you did for me. The moment hung suspended, glittering with months of unspoken things. Someone cleared their throat dramatically. Eleanor stood in the doorway, eyebrows sky high. Are you two going to stand there and stare forever? Or is someone going to do something about all this sexual tension? She announced. Grandma, Rowan said, closing his eyes, mortified. Nora covered her face, laughter bubbling despite her embarrassment. I'm old, not blind, Eleanor continued, relentless and gleeful. You two have been orbiting each other for weeks. Rowan, you canceled multi-million-dollar meetings to sit by her bed. Nora, you blush the second he enters a room. For heaven's sake, do something about it, or I'm going to die of frustration before old age gets me. She turned and left like a queen leaving a decree behind. Rowan and Nora stood in stunned silence, then looked at each other. She's not subtle, Nora said, breathless. Never has been, Rowan said. He hesitated. But she's not wrong. She's not? Nora asked, cautiously hopeful. About me, he said. He took a breath that looked like a leap. About how I feel. Nora, I don't know how to do this. Relationships, vulnerability, letting someone close enough to know where it hurts. But with you, I want to try. Nora's heart soared and steadied like a bird catching a current. You want to try us? If you want to, he said quickly, no pressure. No expectations. Yes, she said, not letting him finish. Yes, I want to try. The smile that broke over his face transformed him. It made the boy who'd learned to swallow emotion and the man who ran an empire visible. Both of them letting joy in. He moved closer, slowly, giving her enough time to step back. She didn't. When his lips touched hers, it was gentle and questioning and perfect. When they pulled apart, both of them breathing like they'd been running, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. Worth punching the desk for, he murmured. You're an idiot, Nora said, laughing. Your hand is going to hurt for days. I don't care one bit, he said, and kissed her again, deeper this time. Months of tension unwound. They didn't notice Eleanor watching from the hallway with a satisfied smile. Finally, she whispered to the house. About time. 2 weeks later, on a Friday night that smelled like wood smoke, Nora sat in Eleanor's favorite chair in the library and read Emma out loud. Rowan pretended to work on his laptop in his own chair, but his cursor didn't move. He watched her instead, the way she gave each character a voice, the way she laughed and startled, the unconscious way her fingers wound a strand of hair around and around when she leaned into a paragraph. Eleanor sat in her recliner, listening, at least watching. Caspian, Rowan, saw the moment her eyes drifted closed. Her breathing softened like a lullaby. Rowan stood and placed a hand on Nora's shoulder. She looked up mid-sentence. She's asleep, he whispered. Nora glanced over and smiled. She always falls asleep in the middle of Austin. She says my voice is a lullaby. It is, Rowan said, and heat slid up Nora's throat at the warmth in his tone. I'll wake her, Nora said, moving to stand. I'll get her, Rowan said. Are you sure? Nora asked, eyeing his still healing wrist. It's better, he said. She's light. It's muscle memory at this point. He slid one arm under Eleanor's knees, the other behind her back, and lifted her with a practiced tenderness that made Nora's heart tilt. Eleanor murmured in her sleep and nuzzled Rowan like a child. They walked together down the hall, Nora opening doors and turning on soft lights, Rowan carrying his grandmother as if she were made of paper and gold. The moment felt domestic and tender and so intimate that Nora felt like she'd stepped into a future. In Eleanor's room, Rowan lay her on the bed. Nora removed her shoes and tucked the blankets around her, placing a kiss on her forehead. Good night, Eleanor, she whispered. Out in the hallway, Rowan took Nora's hand. You're incredible with her, he said. I love her, Nora said simply, like family. I hope that's not. It's perfect, he said, squeezing her hand. She loves you too. You're not just her caregiver, Nora. You're part of us now. They drifted back to the library to retrieve the forgotten novel. The fire had burned down to embers. The room felt like a scene set to be romantic. I should sleep, Nora said, but she didn't move. You should, Rowan agreed, moving closer. It's late. And Eleanor wakes early. Always, he said, hands lifting to cradle her face. But I really want to kiss you right now. Then kiss me, she whispered. He did. It wasn't tentative now. It was a kiss that landed with the weight of held-back longing. Nora's hands slid into his hair. They stumbled onto the sofa with a laugh that dissolved into a gasp. They kissed until their lungs insisted on oxygen. Rowan lifted his head, breathing hard. Not here, he said, voice rough. You deserve better than a library couch at 11 at night where anyone might walk in. Rowan, she began, prepared to say she didn't care. When it happens, he said softly, eyes dark with promise. And it will. I want to do it right, not in a place where I've signed too many contracts. You're worth the wait. How are you real, she whispered, forehead pressed to his. I ask myself the same thing about you every day, he said. They stayed curled together, Nora's head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. At some point, wrapped in warmth, she fell asleep. She woke, or pretended to when she felt herself being lifted. Strong arms, the scent of cedar. Rowan carrying her as he had carried Eleanor. She should open her eyes. She didn't. She let herself be held, surrendered to being cared for in a way she never allowed. He laid her in bed with a gentleness that squeezed tears from behind her eyes. He adjusted her pillow and pulled the covers over her. Then she felt it. A kiss to the top of her head, soft and reverent. His voice followed, so quiet she almost missed it. Good night, Nora. Thank you for walking into my life when I needed you most. The door closed. Nora pressed her fingers to the spot where his lips had been. The feeling that filled her was not panic. It was peace. It felt like home. And it had a name. She was in love with Rowan Kingsley. The garden at dusk became their sanctuary. Once Eleanor was asleep, Rowan and Nora met on a stone bench beneath a wisteria-laced pergola, the lake a bruised ribbon beyond. Tonight, Rowan was quiet, far away. Nora took his hand without asking. Want to talk about it? She said. He looked at their fingers. My parents called, he said, voice heavy. They're coming back in 3 weeks for Christmas. Nora said, oh, the syllable holding more questions than it contained. There was no joy in his tone, only dread. You don't want them to come, she said gently. It's not that I don't want them, he said, running a hand through his hair. It's that every time they return, it's for a gala or an event or an interview with a glossy magazine. Grandma tears herself in half to host, and then, for weeks, she's sadder because it reminds her that her son, my father, chooses everything and anything over her. And you get angry, Nora said. Furious, he said, the word landing like a thrown stone. Because they act like parents when there are witnesses and disappear when there's work. When Grandma was diagnosed, they were too busy to come home. When I had a stress-induced heart attack at 26, he exhaled, humorless. They sent flowers. What? Nora turned to him, alarm spiking. You had a heart attack? "A minor one," he said. "Stress, no sleep, hospital for 3 days. Grandma didn't leave my side. My parents gave me a 5-minute call about managing my time." Her words failed. She shifted onto his lap and wrapped her arms around him, offering what words would only complicate. He went rigid, then melted, burying his face in the curve of her neck like he'd been trying to find it for years. "I'm sorry," he murmured against her skin. "Didn't mean to dump this on you." "Don't you ever apologize for having feelings with me," Nora said fiercely. "Ever. I want all your parts, the shiny and the broken." They stayed wrapped together as night fell around them like a soft blanket. "I want you to meet them," he said finally. "My parents. When they come." "Are you sure?" she asked. "No," he said with painful honesty. "They'll judge you. They'll ask where you went to school, the letters after your name. They'll act like a caregiver isn't appropriate for their son. But you're an important part of my life now. Hiding you would be choosing appearances over truth." He cupped her face in both hands. "I refuse to be like them." Tears rose, hot as gratitude. "Okay," she said, "I'll meet them. Then I'll take care of Eleanor and you when they leave again." "How are you so incredible?" he whispered. "It's just me, Rowan. Nothing special." "You are everything," he said, the words rolling out like a certainty he'd rehearsed silently. He opened his mouth to say more, to say something that had been hovering for nights. Her phone rang, loud as an alarm in the intimate quiet. Dana at a strange hour. "I'm sorry," Nora said, pressing answer. Dana's words tore the ground out from under her. Nora listened, blood draining. "What? Is she okay?" Rowan was up, every nerve on alert. "Nora?" he asked, fear moving like a wave across his features. "Grandma," Nora said, voice shaking. "Lila fell. They think she fractured her hip. They're taking her to the hospital. I have to." "I'll take you," Rowan said, already moving. "Get what you need." "I'm right here." In the car, Nora unraveled. "She's everything to me. If something happens—" "It won't," Rowan said. No false comfort, only steady presence. He took her hand with one of his, the other firm and competent on the wheel. "Lila is strong. Like you." "You can't promise that." "I can't," he agreed. "I can promise I won't leave." And he didn't. He was there in the sterile waiting room under fluorescent lights that made everyone look a little ghostly. He was there for hours while the doctor explained they needed surgery because the fracture was, yes, confirmed. He was there when Lila woke groggy and confused, but grinning at Nora like she'd just done a magic trick. He handed Dana coffee with cream exactly the way she liked it. He complimented Lila's grip when she squeezed his hand from the hospital bed. "He's a good one," Lila whispered when Rowan stepped into the hall to take a call. "You hold on to him, my girl." "I'm trying, Grandma," Nora whispered back. "Don't try," Lila said with surprising steel. "Do. Men like that don't come around twice." They left the hospital at 4 in the morning, the city streets eerily empty. Rowan drove Nora to her family's apartment. The familiar hallway smelled like someone was always cooking onions. "You need your things," he said. "Comfort of home while she's recovering." Inside, Nora finally broke. "I almost lost her," she sobbed into his chest. "And one day, I will. And one day, Eleanor too. One day, everyone Hey," he said, holding her as if he could keep the world out with his arms. "We can't live in fear of losing people. We can only love them well now," he kissed her forehead. "You love better than anyone I've ever met." "What did you say?" Nora pulled back a fraction. He could have pretended he hadn't said it. He didn't. He looked directly at her, and everything fell quiet again. "I love you," he said. "I tried to say it in the garden before the phone rang. And this is a terrible time. You're exhausted. I'm not exactly a poet, but I need you to know I love you, Nora Hart, completely, terrifyingly, in a way I didn't know I was capable of." Her tears came again, different now, sweet relief with salt. "I love you too," she whispered, "so much it scares me." "It doesn't have to be scary," he murmured, "not when it's mutual." He kissed her, and the kiss tasted like salt and hope. "Stay with me tonight?" she asked when breath returned. "Just stay, always," he said. And he did. The envelope came a week later with breakfast. thick, with the logo of an international law firm stamped in dark ink like a bruise. Rowan slid a finger under the seal, read the first line, and his color drained. "What is it?" Eleanor asked immediately. He didn't speak until he'd read the entire letter twice. "An offer," he said finally, voice empty, "to lead the company's European expansion. London, 2 years." Silence thundered. "London," Eleanor repeated, voice thin. "For 2 years? It's an incredible opportunity," Rowan said. No joy in the words. "It's the growth I've planned. New markets, a step forward." "But you'd be far away," Nora said softly. "Yes." He looked at her, something breaking in his eyes. "For 2 years. Are you going to take it?" she asked, dread coiling like a snake inside her. He didn't answer. He stood abruptly, tossed his napkin onto the table like surrender. "I need to think," he said, and left the room. Eleanor stared at the doorway. "He's going to take it," she whispered, voice trembling. "I can see it. He's going to walk down his parents' path, choose work over life." "Please don't say that," Nora said. But her heart feared it, too. That night, Nora found Rowan in his office, papers like snowdrifts across his desk. He was working too fast to be adding anything but noise to his mind. "May I come in?" she asked from the doorway. He looked up. Pain, raw and unguarded, flickered across his face. "Always," he said. She sat opposite him. It felt like they were in a meeting again, a room full of distance. "You're going to accept it, aren't you?" His silence was her answer. "It's everything I've worked for," he said finally. "European expansion. Global growth. It would crown a decade." "I know," she said. "And it means leaving." "Leaving you," he said. "Leaving Grandma. And I don't know if I can." "You can," she said, and though her voice broke, she forced it steady. "If it's your dream, you have to. I won't be the one who asks you to give it up." "What about us?" he asked, pain threading every syllable. "I don't know," she admitted, throat raw. "Long distance, 2 years, different time zones. You building a new life, it would be hard." "Impossible," he said flatly. "You're saying it's over." "I'm saying I won't hold you back," she said, tears finally spilling. "If London is where you need to be, then go. I'll be okay. Eleanor and I will be okay." "I don't want to leave you," he said, voice thick. "I know," she said. "Sometimes love is letting go, isn't it?" In the days that followed, Rowan pulled back emotionally, the way people do when they're practicing leaving. He worked later. He avoided the bench in the garden. Eleanor quieted, to the kind of quiet that felt like not breathing. It was Lila who gave Nora the clarity she needed on a phone call that smelled like chicken soup. "What are you going to do?" Lila asked. "Just let him go?" "What can I do?" Nora cried. "Ask him to give up his dream?" "You can ask him to choose," Lila said, gentler than her words. "Love or ambition? And then listen to the answer. If he chooses ambition, you'll know it wasn't yours to keep. And you'll survive. You always do." 3 days before the deadline, Rowan found Nora in the library, holding Emma like a shield. "I've decided," he said. Nora held her breath. "I'm taking the offer," he said. "I leave in 2 weeks." Her world crumbled. She looked composed and felt like a building collapsing in slow motion. "Okay," she said. "Okay." He seemed surprised she wasn't fighting. It's not about what you want," Nora said, voice shaking, the anger tucked into grief. "It's about always choosing wants that look like what your parents taught you. You want London more than you want to stay. That's fine, truly." She stood because if she stayed, she would shatter in front of him. "I'll take care of Eleanor, I promise." "Nora, wait!" "No," she said, hand on the door. "You've made your choice. Let me make mine. To move on." That night she cried until there weren't enough tears to keep up. She loved Rowan Kingsley, and it wasn't enough. She began moving her few belongings to a smaller room down the hall. Distance. Protection. A knock sounded. "Come in," she said, not looking up. Eleanor entered, an envelope in hand. "I need a favor," Eleanor said. Nora looked up and saw tears in eyes that usually shone bright and dry. "Anything," Nora said immediately. "Deliver this to Rowan," Eleanor said. holding out the envelope with shaking fingers. But only if he really goes. If he gets on that plane, if he leaves me.
What is it?
A letter, Eleanor said. I wrote it last night. I couldn't sleep, thinking I might lose my grandson to the ambition his parents dressed up as virtue. Nora took the envelope like it might bite or break. Should I read it? Don't, Eleanor said. Read it if he goes, and then decide if he deserves to know what he's throwing away. That choice can't be mine. It has to be yours. Because you love him, and love means speaking hard truths sometimes. 10 days before his departure, they set a dinner that might as well have been labeled farewell. Dana and Lila came. Rowan tried to make conversation about weather and movies. No one played along. So, Lila said, as subtle as a hammer. London, pretty city. Rainy, cold, lonely. Grandma, Nora muttered. What? Lila said. I'm making an observation. She pinned Rowan with a look that had stopped Nora in her tracks her entire life. You been? A few times, Rowan said, tense. Business. And you liked it? Lila pressed. The loneliness? Being away from everyone who loves you? Rowan put down his fork carefully. With respect, Mrs. It's Lila, she cut in. And with respect, you're being an idiot. Silence snapped. Eyes darted. My granddaughter loves you, Lila continued, relentless. She won't tell you because she thinks the noble thing is to let you go. But I will. She loves you like I've never seen her love anyone. And you? You're choosing work. Just like your parents chose cruises over their own son. It's not the same, Rowan said, a little too fast. It's exactly the same, Lila said. Different costumes. Same play. You're repeating the pattern. Running from intimacy. Hiding behind a job offer. You're scared, boy. Not of London. Of staying. Grandma, please, Nora said, eyes on her plate, fighting tears. Let him hear it, Lila said, not looking away from Rowan. You grew up believing love is temporary. People leave, so you're leaving first. But you're hurting the ones who stay. You're hurting Eleanor, and my granddaughter, who has the biggest heart God ever made, is breaking quietly because she thinks she isn't enough to make you stay. Rowan looked at Nora. She finally looked up, tears gathering like stars. I never said, he started. You didn't have to, Nora said. Your actions did. You chose. I respect it. But Grandma's right. You're running. Just like they ran from you. She stood. Excuse me. She left. Dana followed. Eleanor went after them, leaving Rowan alone with Lila. You'll hate me, Lila said matter-of-factly. No, Rowan said quietly. You're right. Then why are you still going? She asked. Because I don't know how not to, he admitted. Work is all I've ever known. The only thing I'm sure I'm good at. You're good at loving too, Lila said, her voice softening. I've seen it in the way you look at my granddaughter. In how you take care of Eleanor. You've built a home here without noticing. She leaned forward. Ask yourself what kind of life you want. An empire that feels empty. Or a family. That night, Rowan didn't sleep. He wandered the house like a man visiting his memories. The library where Nora had laughed over Emma. The kitchen where she'd tried to teach him the proper way to flip pancakes. Too confident, she'd laughed, coaxing the batter into a circle. The garden bench where the lake had caught their reflections in silver threads. He realized these were not rooms, they were moments. They were a life. He was about to walk away from it. In the morning, 8 days before his flight, he found Eleanor at breakfast. Where's Nora? He asked, panicked, as if she might have vanished to ease his leaving. Taking her mother and grandmother home, Eleanor said, studying him with eyes that missed nothing. You look terrible. I didn't sleep. Guilt does that, she said, mildly. He sat. Grandma, I need your advice. You'll ignore it, she said, kind but blunt, like you always do. But go on. How do I know if I'm making the right choice? Ask yourself this, Eleanor said, reaching across the table to take his hand. What will you regret more? Missing a career opportunity you don't even need, or losing the woman who feels like home for the first time in your life? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. 3 days before departure, Nora found Eleanor's letter under her door, sealed, his name written in Eleanor's beautiful, shaky hand. She hadn't seen Rowan in days. He was avoiding her, staying late at the office, coming home after midnight like a ghost. Coward, she thought about him. Coward, she thought about herself, hiding to avoid a goodbye that felt like a cliff.
Eleanor had told her she could read the letter if she needed to. Nora stood by the window, the lake gray and endless, and broke the seal.
My dearest Rowan, if you are reading this, it means you have truly gone, that you chose London over staying. I need you to know I am not angry. Disappointed, yes. Heartbroken, certainly, but not angry. You have always done what you thought was right, what you were taught would be praised. Ever since you were a little boy, stubborn, determined, working harder than anyone to prove you were worth something, as if you ever needed to.
Here is a truth I never told you. You were always enough. Not because of your accomplishments, not because of money or headlines or boardrooms, just because you were you, my grandson, my boy.
Nora sees that. She sees a value in you that has nothing to do with a CEO title. She sees a man who reads poetry at midnight, who cries alone when he thinks no one is watching, who loves so deeply but is afraid to show it, because love has not always been a safe place for him. If you go, you will lose her, not just a relationship, the chance at the life you have always deserved, a life of family, of home, of being loved for who you are.
London will not give you that. Success will not give you that. Only love can. And that love is here, if you have the courage to stay.
If you truly go, know this. I will love you anyway. I will love you from afar. And I will miss you until my last day. With all my heart, Grandma Eleanor. By the time Nora reached the last line, she was sobbing. Eleanor had said what Nora couldn't. That night, his last night, Nora went to his room. The door was ajar. Suitcases lay open. Clothes were folded in stacks that looked like armor. Tickets, documents, his life reduced to paper.
I need you to know something, Nora said before fear could eat the words. He stopped packing and looked up.
I love you, she said, tears spilling. I know I've said it, but I need to say it again. I love you in a way that scares me because it means you have the power to destroy me. And I love you enough to let you go because your dream matters. I will never ask you to give it up. He crossed the room in 2 strides and framed her face in his hands like he had something to hold on to. Nora. But I need you to know, she continued, pulling away an inch so he would hear her. If you go, I won't be here when you get back. I can't spend 2 years waiting and hoping you choose to return. I will have to move on. I will have to find someone who chooses me first, who sees the home we built and knows it's worth more than any contract.
You deserve that, he said, eyes glassy. You deserve better than me.
I don't want better, she cried. I want you. I want the version of you that stays, the version that chooses. If that version doesn't exist, then, she backed toward the door. Then I accept that.
Her hand hit the doorknob when he said,
I love you too. His voice cracked. And it's killing me to leave. Then don't, she said, not turning around. It's as simple as that. She closed the door and left him alone with his luggage and his choice. In the morning, Nora woke with that specific dread that feels like weight. His flight was early. He would be gone. She went to the kitchen to start coffee for Eleanor, forcing routine into a day that had none. The kitchen was empty. The hall was empty. She checked the garage. His car was gone. He was gone. No goodbye, no last words, just gone. Nora slid to the kitchen floor and let the sobs take her. Eleanor found her minutes later and sat slowly beside her, wrapping her arms around Nora like she had shrunk back into a girl. He's gone, Nora cried. He really left. I know, my dear, Eleanor whispered, her own tears falling onto Nora's hair. I know. They got up eventually. They made coffee. They did the exercises. But the mansion felt hollow, like a museum of relics from a life that had been evacuated. He had taken the light and left shadows. 3 weeks passed. 21 days. The number thrummed in Nora's bones. Eleanor seemed to shrink, not in body but in spirit. Nora did everything right. Exercises, medication, meals arranged by color and nutrition. But you can't tape a broken heart. Not Eleanor's, not Nora's. On a cold Monday morning in December, gray sky pressing low, Nora was in the garden watering winter plants that didn't need it, just to be doing something, when she heard a car crunch on the gravel. No one was expected. She turned and saw it, A black Mercedes, his car. It stopped. The door opened, he stepped out. He was thinner, dark circles under his eyes, clothes rumpled like he'd slept sitting up. He looked like a storm had run through him and kept going. "Nora," he said. His voice sounded like he hadn't used it in days. "You're not supposed to be here," Nora said, using the watering can like a shield. "You're supposed to be in London, building your empire." "I couldn't," he said, voice splintering. "I couldn't stay." "You were there 3 weeks," she said, closing around the number like a fist. 21 days, he said. 504 hours, each one worse than the last. He took a step, she took one back. "Please," he said, "let me explain." "Did you miss home?" she asked, the words sharp to keep herself from bleeding. "Your grandmother?" "I came back because I made the wrong choice," he said, the words tumbling out. "London was a mistake, the biggest of my life. Every second I was there, all I could think about was you, and Grandma, and how I left the only place I've ever felt like I belong." "You can't—" "I don't," he said, pain and apology in the same breath. "I know I messed up. I know I might have lost you for good, but I had to try. I had to tell you I made the wrong choice, and I'm here now to make the right one." "What's that?" she whispered, breath caught. "You," he said without hesitation. "Us. This." He gestured at the house, the garden, the lake, home, family, love, all the things I spent years pretending I didn't need because I was afraid to need them. But I do. I need them like air. "You left London," she said, too stunned to fill in the sentence. "On the first day," he said, a humorless laugh catching. "I went into a meeting, looked at a room full of people who only saw a CEO, and realized I don't want to spend 2 years being a title. I want to be seen the way you see me, as a person who reads Rilke and makes bad hot chocolate and cries during storms." "Then why did you stay for 3 weeks?" Nora asked, a sliver of her old practical brain peeking through. "Untangling the mess," he said. "Finding someone who actually wanted the job. Restructuring so I wasn't setting fire to the work we've done. I didn't want to do to them what my parents did to me. Leave and let everyone else clean up." He stepped closer. "It wasn't my dream, Nora. It was theirs. It took me 21 days to admit that." He was in front of her now, close enough for her to smell the travel and the something that had always been Rowan. "Nora Hart," he said, voice steadying like a heartbeat, "I love you. More than ambition, more than success, more than anything I thought mattered. If you give me one chance, I will spend the rest of my life proving I choose you. Every day." "What about your grandmother?" a voice called from the veranda. Eleanor stood there, leaning on her walker, tears shining. "Did you come back for me too?" "Grandma," he said, rushing to her, folding into her arms. "I'm sorry. For leaving, for hurting you, for Dash," she said, patting his back. "You came back. That's what matters." She kissed his forehead and turned to the garden. "Now go ask her properly. On your knees. Make it movie-worthy. She deserves it." He turned. Nora stood with the watering can hanging from her fingers, heart beating loud enough to feel in her throat. He walked back and sank to his knees on the stone path, the wisteria above them shivering in a breeze. "I don't have a ring," he said, voice shaking. "I don't have a speech. I have the truth. Without you, I have everything and nothing. I have an empty mansion, a full bank account, and a heart that forgot how to beat properly." He took her hand, held it like a vow. "You taught me home isn't a place, it's a person. You are my home, Nora. Wherever you are is where I belong. So I'm asking, not as your boss, not as a rich man, but as someone who loves you more than breathing. Will you come home? Will you stay with me? Will you build a life with me? Not the version my parents approve of, the version that's messy and real and ours." She laughed and cried simultaneously. "You're an idiot," she sobbed. "I know," he said, smiling despite it. "I left. I broke you." "I know," he said again, and regret softened every feature. "I regret it every second." "Promise you won't do it again?" she asked. "I promise," he said, like a vow to something bigger than the two of them. "You are my priority, always." Silence fell. Only their breathing filled the space between them. "Yes," Nora said finally, and his eyes went bright like fireworks. "Yes," he asked, hope wide open on his face. "Yes, you idiot," she laughed through tears. "Yes, I'll come home, because you're my home too." He stood and pulled her into a kiss that was relief and promise and apology and joy woven together. From the veranda, Eleanor clapped her hands, childlike and queenly at once. "Finally," she crowed. "I thought I'd die of boredom waiting for you two to figure out what the rest of us knew months ago." Spring coaxed the garden back to life with shy greens and tiny blooms. 3 months later, Nora sat on their bench and read aloud to Eleanor, who sat in a chair Rowan had designed. Extra padding, proper support, space for a blanket and a book. Rowan's laptop glowed from the breakfast table. He worked mostly from home now, deciding that profit and presence weren't enemies if you were brave enough to face yourself. Life was imperfect in perfect ways. The house sounded different. More laughter, more footsteps, the quiet of people content in their corners. The gravel in the driveway sang a song that meant visitors. A man and a woman in their 60s stepped from a glossy car. Impeccable clothes, wealth radiated like a smell. Nora recognized them from pictures online that always mentioned gala names. Marina and Charles Kingsley. "Mother?" Father Rowan's voice came from behind Nora. He walked barefoot across the flagstones, jeans and a t-shirt, hair a little wild. "What a surprise!" "Rowan," Marina said, air-kissing the space near his cheeks, her perfume expensive and cold. "You're looking casual." "I'm at home," he said simply. He turned. "This is Eleanor, my grandmother, whom you haven't visited in months." "8," Eleanor supplied, unbothered. "But I'm not counting." Her smile held knives. "And this," Rowan said, taking Nora's hand and tugging her gently to his side, "is Nora, my fiancée." The world paused. Marina blinked in disbelief. "Fiancé?" She made the word sound like an accusation. "Since when?" "Since I realized I don't want to spend another day of my life without her," Rowan said. He glanced at Nora. A simple diamond ring sparkled on her finger. Eleanor's ring, handed down with tears and joy. "It's a pleasure to meet you," Nora said politely. Marina's gaze slid over her. Simple dress, bare nails, no designer purse, and dismissed her twice. "And you are the nurse?" Marina asked, tone neutral like frost. "Physical therapist," Nora said, not rising to it. "Eleanor's caregiver." "How convenient," Marina murmured. After a tense tour, during which Marina found fault with art, families, and the weather, she said, "So, when is the wedding?" "In 2 months," Rowan said. "Small. Intimate. Here. People who love us, that's all." "Small?" Marina laughed the way people do when they think others will join and don't. "Rowan, you are a Kingsley. A wedding is an event." "It's our day," Rowan said, his voice cool steel. "It will be the way we want it." "And if we refuse to come?" Marina asked. A silence so taut it vibrated, thrummed. Rowan smiled evenly. "Then you'll miss it." "Your choice, as it's always been." "Marina, perhaps we should," Charles began, subdued in a way that said he had learned the cost of pushing too hard. "No," Marina snapped. She turned to Nora. "No offense, dear, but you don't belong in this world. You're sweet, I'm sure, but unsuitable. Rowan needs a wife who can represent the family. He needs a wife who loves him." Eleanor's voice cut through, sharp as a bell, and she does. Eleanor rose with Nora's help. "I've watched her. She took care of me when she looked pointedly at Marina and Charles. "We're too busy polishing your image to notice your family was cracking." "Mother," Charles said, trying to keep his voice calm. "No," Eleanor said. "You need to hear it. You abandoned Rowan. You made him feel like nothing he did was enough. He grew up believing love was conditional. Then he met Nora. She taught him love is an action. Staying is a choice. She stays even when it's hard." "Grandma," Rowan said, moving to steady Eleanor. "She stays," Eleanor repeated, a finality to it. "So you have a choice. Accept this. Come to the wedding, try to be a family, or leave and finally admit you've chosen your reflection over your son. But don't you dare show up later and claim you weren't invited. 2 months later, the garden was a dream. Lanterns hung in the trees. Wisteria dripped purple sweetness. The lake sighed gently beyond. Dana and Lila sat in the front row, holding hands like young girls. Eleanor was there too, in a wheelchair now, eyes bright and sharp. Surprisingly, Marina and Charles were also present, in the back row, looking like people who'd wandered into a world not built for them but wanting to try. The music began. Nora walked down the aisle alone, by choice. When she reached Rowan, his eyes were wet. "You're beautiful," he whispered. "You are too," she whispered back, swiping a tear from his cheek with her thumb. They spoke vows they'd written in the quiet of the library and in the noisy kitchen and on the bench where they had made and unmade decisions. Words spilled like promises and landed like roots. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," the garden erupted, clapping, laughter, a whistle from Matteo. Later, Nora went to get a glass of water. A man approached. "Excuse me," he said. "I need some help. I'm looking for—" An arm slid around Nora's waist. Familiar heat. Rowan's voice, low and warm. "She's with me," he said. The man laughed, embarrassed. "Ah, the bride. Congratulations. Restroom?" "Down the hall to the right," Rowan said, not letting Nora go until the man disappeared. "She's with me?" Nora said, tilting her face to his, smiling. "Déjà vu." "Better than the original," he murmured, tracing the ring on her finger with his thumb. "Because this time it's true." "Forever." "Forever," she said. They danced and the world blurred. Eleanor watched with Dana and Lila, the 3 women who had built and rebuilt families, and whispered, "Worth the wait." "It was," Lila said, a tear slipping down her cheek. "My girl is home." "They both are," Dana added. "Finally." And it was true. Rowan and Nora, 2 hearts broken in different places, had healed by choosing each other again and again. They found home not in a mansion or a city or an address on a business card. They found it in each other. They found it by staying when storms knocked out the lights and by coming back when leaving felt easier. They found it by making hot chocolate, by listening to Wilde and Rilke, by letting themselves be held. Home forever.